So I'm going to be talking about design patterns in Vue.js. Design patterns is one of these things that's kind of magical to me. It's amazing that they figured it out and that it's like a really cool thing. So because it's very magical to me, I wanted to show you a magic trick before we get started. Can everybody do this? Like everybody do this. Now do this, this, and this. Okay, you got it? Now wiggle, look at your hand, wiggle your index finger on your left-hand side. Got it? Good, look at it. You got it? Okay. Now wiggle your right-hand side middle finger. Right, okay. Now wiggle your pinky on your left-hand side. Okay, now take your hand, hold it out like this, and go like this. Magic. All right, so phenomenal design patterns in Vue.js. My name is Jacob Schatz. I started the front-end team at GitLab. And I've done a bunch of things at GitLab. And I'm currently a staff engineer on the Meltano team. Meltano is a GitLab startup. It is a data science lifecycle framework. And you can go to meltano.com to find more about it. It's a really cool thing. And we use Vue.js in Meltano and in GitLab, as you probably heard. So who here has heard of the Gang of Four? Okay, so the question is, are we talking about the Australian band Gang of Four? No? Are we talking about the conspiracy with the original characters in Sesame Street, the Gang of Four? How about the original four? It's the original four Teletubbies, right? No, it's actually Sister, Sister squared. No. The Gang of Four is the authors of this book, Design Patterns, Elements of Reusable Object-Oriented Software. And the book is, it's an incredible book, and it was written a long time ago, and in it are these design patterns, which I'm going to talk about today. And they say design patterns are a reusable solution to a commonly occurring problem within a given context in software design. So, that's a whole lot of stuff there. The book was written a long time ago, so today you might have an easier time reading one of the many, many books on design patterns. This one is one that I highly recommend by Alexander Schatz. It's called Dive into Design Patterns. It's a really, really, really good book. And it explains basically the same concepts that you find in the original book, just, maybe a little easier. But design patterns are there to solve a particular problem, and I want to show you how to use them in Vue.js. But first we have to come up with a problem, okay? So here's a problem that you might see in Vue.js. You might have a couple of complex forms, and so what you wind up doing is you wind up like writing a component for each individual form, and before you know it, you have like tons of forms, and you have like tons of components, and then your file system looks like this. So you have, your complaint form, your contact form, damn it, another form, forgot password form. And you just have all these forms, and it's like just giant component list of forms, and it's kind of ridiculous. So what if I told you, yeah. I think I can hear Sarah Drasner from here. That's, what if I told you that you could make the whole thing look just like this? Just one Vue file and one builder and one director. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to use a design pattern called the builder design pattern. Does anybody know who that is? Yeah, that's Bob the Builder. Does anybody know what that is? Yeah, does anybody know that Bob the Builder built the Batmobile? No, that's just alliteration. So you use the builder design pattern when you want your code to be able to use different representations of some product. So think of a house. You might have a stone house, a wooden house, and a brick house. And, maybe through polymorphism and, all this stuff, you're going to wind up creating like one base class house. But with the builder design pattern, you can actually make it a lot easier. So the way the builder design pattern works, and this is just to give you an example, is that you have a builder, Bob the Builder, and then you have what's called a director. Does anybody know who that is? Steven Spielberg, that's right. Yeah. There's the director, Steven Spielberg. And the builder has all the things that he needs to build things. So here's your individual parts. And the director knows what he wants built. So the director is going to say, take all those little things that you have, builder, and build this. So, I mean, in this example, you could build a car with some pants and shoes, but, you know, this is a different type of slide. So in our implementation, it might look something like this if we did it right. Line 4 is the main meat of it here. It's a form builder component, and you pass it some form method which says make user sign in. And by that, we have our user sign in. But you could replace that with make user register, make payment form, whatever. The meat of it is inside that component. We're going to find out what's under the hood. So here is our form builder component. Notice it doesn't have any template because all of the work that we're going to do is going to be by using the render method, that H method, which allows us to build components dynamically through code. So here's our render method, and the most important thing is that we have a director, we have a builder, which is 2 classes that we haven't looked at yet. The builder gets the H method so that it can actually build stuff, you know, that makes sense. And then the director is going to take that method that you passed in and very, you know, easily call any method that you want on it. And the director gets past the builder, because the director is going to talk to the builder. And then we return builder.getForm, because the builder has built the thing, it's got to give it back. So our form builder class looks something like this. In the constructor, we have H so that it can actually do the building of things. And then we have fields. Think of this as if this is the form builder, but you could have a house builder, you could have a car builder, you could have an anything builder. And in the case of that, you need to hold on to those things that you built so that you can return them after. Now, this is a long method. What it says doesn't really matter. It's just the title of it. We're going to have 2 methods in our case. One's called setFields, one's called setSubmit. And these 2 methods, if you had a house builder, might be called make doors, make windows, make floor. If it was a car app, it would be called, you know, make doors, make seats, make steering wheel. And so the meat of it is right here, setFields. And you notice that we have this thing called this.formInput. Doesn't even matter what it does. I didn't even include it in this code because you don't need to know about it. The important thing is that setFields is going to create the fields using H. And then our director is really easy. All that the director does is it just calls a method called make user sign in form, make register form, and it calls the individual building methods of the builder class. So in this case, make user sign in form calls setFields, it sets a name, sets a password, and it sets submit. And so in this case, here's our make user sign in form, and it calls the individual things of the builder. And so then, bam, we get our nice user sign in form. But to do that, we just call our form builder called make user sign in, but not just that. Wait, there's more. There's the user register form to do that. Excuse me. Jeez Louise. To do that, we call make user register form, and to make a payment form, we would just call some method called make payment form on line 4 there. So all of the different forms you would want to build, and you could do this with Vue with anything. It doesn't have to just be with forms. It could be with something else. But that's the Vue, that's the builder design pattern kind of implemented in Vue. And if you want to go see a running example, a code sandbox, then you can go to jacobschatz.com/Vue-BDP for builder design pattern, and you can check that out. So that's just one design pattern, but I want to show you one other example. Here's another problem. And that was just to give you a little taste. We're going to go another level up. Maybe not to 11, but maybe to like 9. So your Vue components, your Vuex components might not be reusable. And the reason is because they're usually tied to a store. And when you tie things to the store, it makes it that you can't like necessarily distribute it, because you'd have to distribute the store as well. And that's kind of a problem. Now, there's definitely ways to solve this within Vuex. I want to just show you, to use design patterns, how you could solve this. Your app might get huge because you're not really distributing things. You're writing a lot of code in one Vuex file. You might get lost because you've got all of this code all over the place. So one solution is to use what's called the command design pattern. And the command design pattern is my favorite design pattern. The command design pattern is a behavioral design pattern that turns a request into a standalone object that contains all the information about the request. Now that's what it says in the book, but what does it actually mean? Well, let's give you an example here. We might all agree here, or I agree, that GUIs should not have access to business logic. And essentially, your Vue should not have access to your business logic directly. So in a common Vue component, a lot of times your button will call update. And although the update method might not be in your component, because your component you can think of as the Vue, it still has kind of direct access to the business logic. And that makes it less portable. It makes it less distributable. So instead, what we could do is we could do business logic through what we'll call a logic layer. Basically saying, we won't call that, we'll call something else, and that something else we'll call the business logic. So in this case, we have the save command here, which is going to do the business logic. And our buttons will call the save command. You're saying, well, that's kind of similar. The command design pattern has one interface, and the method that you call can take no parameters. And you're saying, well, how am I going to pass around the data? When I type in an input, how am I going to pass stuff around? You'll see, it's going to be really cool. It's the execute method. So here's your save command. It has one method called execute. And what happens when we execute? That's where the business logic happens. Now, this is going to be a little bit of a different way of thinking about things because you're going to have one class for each thing you do versus one class for all the things you do. You'll see in a second. But in this case, let's make it so that your Vue, your GUI, doesn't actually call the commands directly, and instead we'll use what's called the observer design pattern, and we'll just like kind of squish it in there. So you click a button, it dispatches an event. So one button might call menu.save, one button's going to call GUI.save, and one button's going to call shortcut.save. Because they're all a save method, they might all do the same save command, but they all call different events. And if you were to do this before, you would have to pass these different parameters to the methods, and instead, we're just going to dispatch an event, and we're going to tie the events to the command. And the command's going to call the execute. Let's see if we can make this work. When you actually use the command design pattern, this is what it looks like. You actually create an instance of a class for every single thing you do. And you say, well, maybe that's really heavy. I don't know. No, it's not heavy. It's really nice. And then that instance you can call execute on. So let's see how this would work. You click the button, menu.save. That's tied to the save command. The save command calls execute, and it does the business. This has huge benefits. Say that you are in a restaurant from the 80s wearing your turquoise sweater, and you want to order something from the restaurant. Would you go to the chef directly and say, this is what I want? No, you talk to the server because the server is kind of your in-between, and then that person can then take all the orders and give them to the chef. The chef can then queue them up. And this is something that the command design pattern really benefits from. One is that you can create a queue of these things to execute, and then you could execute them all at once by going through the array and just executing them one by one. And because the server has written down each one of your orders on a piece of paper, then it's easy to undo them as well, because everything that you have is encapsulated in that one piece of paper. So that's really great too. To encapsulate all of this functionality, I made a little library called Vue Commander. And of course, if you make a library, you got to make a website. So I made vuecommander.com to encapsulate the observer and the command design pattern. And you could use this, and this is just more of a thought experiment, but you could use this instead of Vuex. And what you would do is you would type in, like let's say you were creating a to-do app. As you type into that input, those events are going to get dispatched. And notice that they're just getting dispatched. No one's necessarily listening to them. It's your choice to hook up those events to something. So with Vue Commander, we hooked up those events to our save and update commands, and those are going to actually update our state. And because file model is one individual object literal, it acts as what's called a singleton, meaning there's one instance of it for everything. And then rinse, wash, repeat. So let's see how we would use this in an actual to-do app. Let's create the to-do app using Vue Commander, which is my thought experiment here. This is what your file system would look like. You have your .vue files, so you essentially have two components. One is for an individual to-do, and one is for multiple to-dos. And then you have your model, which is your state. And then you have your app.js, which is where like kind of everything gets instantiated. And then you have your commands. Instead of actions, you have commands. And then you have a context which ties it all together. Your Vue model is, your to-do model is going to look really simple. It's just an object literal, which has to-dos in it. And the individual to-do has an ID, content, and done. You're going to have three commands because in your to-do app, you're going to do three things. You're going to add, you're going to click done, and you're going to press delete. And so our to-do add command, here's an actual implementation of the command design pattern. We create a constructor. Vue Commander is going to pass the event along so that you have access to that data. So notice the execute method doesn't have any parameters in it. It's able to access the event that got passed in through the constructor. And on this, we'll call execute. And for our to-do app, to create a new to-do, we create this new object. The object gets pushed onto our list of to-dos because the model is available. And then we reset the current input. And because we're using Vue.js, when you set current input to blank, the actual input's going to get erased because the value is bound. And so our to-do done looks very similar. I did something kind of hacky here just to get it done really quickly, is on line 10. We're just toggling the state of the to-do, but it's in that execute method. And Vue Commander will automatically call execute for you, or you could implement it yourself. And the delete command is also 2 lines. We're just splicing out that item from the event that was passed through, and then we're doing, a kind of a poor person's solution here to remap the indices so that the IDs stay proper. And I didn't include what remap indices does. But there's our commands. What would our components look like? We only need 2 components. We have to-do and to-dos. To-do is the individual to-do, and to-dos is the list of individual to-dos. So here is our list of to-dos. Here's our input. What do you want to do today? And we bind the value to current input. On enter, we submit the to-do. And then if the length is 0, we'll just write, there's nothing left to do. You did all of your tasks for today. And then we'll just loop through all of the to-dos. This looks very similar to anything else that you've written. There's our to-do component. We're passing it the individual to-do down through the props. And then notice that we import the to-do model, which acts as a singleton. We have access to our data through that. And what's cool about this is that you could have a to-do model, you could have a this model, you could have a that model. You can separate out the data into different individual models, and you can be as granular or as generic as you want with this. And then here's your to-do.vue that you're importing, and you just say it's one of the components. And the data, we're just going to link that directly to the to-do model, and because we put that in the data, it's going to make it reactive. So on line 27, it becomes reactive. And then we have one method called submit to do. Because we're using this Vue Commander thing, just like in Vuex, you have this $store. Vue Commander has this $context. Excuse me. This $context. And to dispatch that event, you have events.notify. Now already this component is reusable because you dispatched events. Now you need to make something that listens to the events. It's not tied to anything. It's just dispatching events. So it's very reusable in that way. And you dispatch the event, you pass along e.currentTarget.value. For our individual to-do, we're just kind of like inputting all the values. We're getting to-do.content. We have a couple of buttons, some classes to make when you click it, it makes it done. And then if it's done, then it can show the delete. So it's a very similar thing. A little further down on the page, your script tag, it just dispatches 2 events. To-do.done, to-do.delete. And it passes along the to-do that got to did. I don't know if that's a word. It's a word now. So you have your commands and you have your components. Now you need to tie it all together. You need to say that when this event is dispatched from the observer command design pattern, I want this command to get executed. So we're going to plug everything together. So on line 6, you can see that we call Vue.use VueCommander. And the context gets past 2 things. An event that you would actually dispatch. So for to-do done, we will execute the to-do done command. For to-do submitted, we execute to-do add command. For to-do delete, we execute the to-do delete command. And in our app.js, it looks similar to what you would do in Vuex. The store, instead of the store, we're passing the context, which we just created in that last file, and everything else stays the same. So what's really, really cool about this is that every time that you type a letter, you are instantiating a completely new class and calling execute on it. And that's creating those individual to-dos. The beauty of this is that because you instantiate that class, you now have a window of time saved in that instantiation. Because you have a window of time saved, you can now undo really, really easily. To implement undo is kind of one of these mysteries in software programming. It's typically done with 2 different design patterns. One is the command design pattern. I didn't make this up. This is straight out of the textbooks. And the other is the memento design pattern. The benefit of the command design pattern is that the undo stack has a really light footprint. The bad part is that you have to implement like what actually undoes. You have to say like how it undoes, how it reverses that action. With the memento design pattern, it just saves a snapshot of the state, the whole state, every time. And the benefit of that is that you don't have to tell it what to undo. You just go back to that point in that state and you just like insert the whole state at that point. But we're using the command design pattern. So you can see that our app works. So to implement undo, VueCommander as a practice will call save state before it calls execute so that you can tell it how to save your state and then you can implement an undo method. So on line 10 there, we have save state. We save a backup. And because this is an individual instance of a class, this .backup will be this point in time. Even if you're typing individual letters, it will save that letter. And this is really lightweight, even though it seems like it'd be heavy to instantiate a new class. And that undo method, it's there so that you can call undo, and you just tell it what it has to do. In our case, to undo it, we just take the backup and replace done. So this is in our done command. All you have to do is kind of like reverse what done was. So now our button can be tied to this undo method. The button calls undo, and as long as you have history left, then this $.history.pop, which lets the history is an array of individual things that are getting pushed onto the undo stack. We'll just call pop. It'll give us the command, and then we just call undo on it. And that's all we have to do. Full undo implemented in like 2 lines of code. So you can see every time we call execute, it pushes it onto a stack, like the data structure stack. And now every time we click undo, it calls history.pop, and it pops it off and calls undo on it. Pops it off, calls undo, pops it off, calls undo. And now we have undo implemented really nicely. So when you look at this again, notice that we actually have undo. When we click done, it's saving its state. And then we can click undo, and it undoes its state. It's a really, really cool thing. So the idea behind this is not that you should necessarily use or not use VueCommander, The point is that the command design pattern is a really cool design pattern that's used to encapsulate a state in like a particular point in time, and then you can reuse that for anything. One of the things that people use it for is undo. With the observer design pattern, which is different than pub/sub, and again, I'm not teaching you all the nitty-gritty of this, but the point is that you can go look this stuff up and read about it, but with the observer design pattern, we can dispatch events off into nowhere. And if people decide to listen to it, if your code decides to listen to those events, it's up to that. But the great part is now you've got really nicely decoupled code. No class is relying on any other class. Everything is completely singular in that way. So design patterns. I showed you 3 design patterns. There are, I think, like over 25 of them in that book alone. So I suggest that you go read about them and learn about them. Thank you so much.